So welcome again to the Comic Book Historian Podcast. I'm Alex Grand with my co-host Jim Thompson, and today we have an exciting guest, Howard Chaykin, who is a writer, artist, auteur, as well as a comic book historian who's written and penciled for a variety of projects over decades. Howard, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm very grateful to have. I'm willing to mistake attention for affection, so I'm here for you.
All right,
okay, so Jim, I'm going to get started.
Stop fighting, girls. It's really inappropriate. Just cut it out.
All right, so Howard, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I wanted to start with the early background questions because I think it's somewhat important, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's somewhat important to understanding you, both in terms of an auteur theory sort of point of view, but also just there's a lot of you and your background and your childhood and your growing up in the comics. Would you say that's correct?
I'd say that is true. I mean, all of us who do this for a living, all of us who make shit up for a living, both apply what we've learned and experienced in our own lives, but also bring wish dreams to it. You know, that dream is a wish your heart makes stuff. Wish is this the way it should have been? This is the way I'd like it to have been. That sort of thing. But yes, I'd have to agree with that, yes.
And at the same time, you've mentioned in interviews a certain, I won't say distaste, but a lack of love or enthusiasm for certain alternate comics, autobiographical tendencies that kind of dominate the field.
How do you mean? Like what?
Oh, like the ones that are not independent comics, but the alternate comics, the Comics Journal really were advocates for. The ones that are more like
you mean the stuff that come out of like the post-Picard, post-Spiegelman universe?
Exactly.
I see. I wouldn't say so much disdain, but uninterest.
I think that's right.
I don't have a particularly censorious sensibility. I have an aversion to the very idea of censorship. And the problem I have with these books is less their existence than their assumption of a kind of a moral plane of superiority to anything else that exists in the same sort of medium and franchise.
And there's certainly that notion in the way that Gary Groth talked about it, but also in the way that Spiegelman talks about it, or just the embracement of something like Fun Home, all of which I like. But that's never been what you do when you bring your stuff. I almost said baggage, and that's wrong. But
I'm willing to go with baggage. I really am. Come on. I mean, I am. Look, I'm a 68-year-old Jew, product of Brooklyn and New York. If I haven't got baggage, what's the point of being neurotic?
If you didn't say Jew in Brooklyn in the first 5 minutes of his talking, I would have felt like I had failed in this initial question. So,
I'm here for you in that regard.
So let's hear that background a little bit.
Look, I mean, I am as defined as I am by the fact that I'm a Brooklyn Jew. I mean, it really is. I was talking about this not 20 minutes ago in the context of I live in a small town, and I was having brunch with a group of people at the beach. I mean, I live the antithetical life to what would assume that I was born to live through. And I explained to someone that when I was 13 years old, I was very ill, and I spent a week in bed, and I watched television all day, and I watched in those days. In New York City, the WNEW affiliate owned the Warner Brothers product, and they showed a week's worth of the gangster comedies, the second cycle of the gangster films at Warner Brothers, in which the same cast and the same sets were used to tell comic stories of gangsters. City for Conquest, Brother Orchid, Slight Case of Murders, that sort of thing. And
these would be after the production code came in and
this is like 38 to 40 in that realm.
Oh, okay.
And I realized that everybody in the movies, all these great Warner Brothers stock players, everybody in those movies I realized that everybody in the movies who was supposed to be stupid sounded like me. And I made it a concerted and discerning effort to cease to sound like one of the Bowery Boys or Leo Gorcey or Huntz Hall. Because that's what I sounded like when I was 13. By the time I was 15 or 16, I had developed, from smoking as well, I developed this voice. That voice carries more authority than it deserves, I might add.
When you say this voice, you mean like the way, your manner of speech right now?
The way I sound now.
Yeah, okay.
I've always been this articulate. It's gotten me into more trouble than you can possibly imagine.
I like it.
I mean that with all my heart. And that aspect of my childhood, growing up in Brooklyn in the 1950s, I was born in 50 and raised in Brooklyn. I was raised a block and a half and 25 years later than Gil Kane. We went to the same grammar school, I might add. And my experience as a little boy was to escape into comic books. Comic books, movies, and television were the means of which, because I am basically a coward. I don't like confrontation of any kind physically because I'm afraid of getting hurt. And comics were a place to hide. And I loved comic books. And I loved comic books unequivocally. I mean, uncritically, everything about comic books. I loved the language. And from the minute I saw comic books, I recognized that someone made these things, and I wanted to be one of those people.
So what were you reading?
DC and Timely, or what?
Well, in 55, I got a box of comics. I read all the DC stuff. I read the teenage stuff. I love the Archie stuff. A lot of Looney Tunes and a lot of Disney stuff. The one stuff I couldn't accommodate was the horror stuff. For some reason, the box of comics I got had no ECs in them, but they had the EC imitators and a lot of Injury to the Eye motif comics. And you weren't getting the Kurtzman, the combat stuff. No, not at that. I discovered EC like many of my generation did in the reprints that came out from Ballantine in the early '60s. The Mad reprints were followed by a collection of the science fiction stuff and the horror stuff. And they were printed sideways in bad black and white print on Ballantine paper. And they were a revelation. I had no idea where they came from. They didn't exist. And at that point, I was a Golden Age collector, because in those days, Golden Age collecting was affordable.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I loved the gold. I was a serious Golden Age collector.
So, who were the Golden Age artists that you were drawn to, or did it matter at that point?
I was 12 years old, and 12 and 13, and at that point, I wasn't aware of artists. I was aware of content. Like all kids, I mean, the brand for me in those days was the character, was the material. The maturing eye evolves past that and develops the sensibility to recognize the fact that the artist is the brand, the talent is the brand. But as a child, we innately understand, from our perspective, that the character is the brand. And I loved Jack Burnley's Superman. And years later, I realized it was Jack Burnley, that sort of thing. I think it changed a little bit. I was 12 when Kirby left Marvel and went to DC. And we knew who Kirby and Ditko were, partly because the advertisements were, Kirby is coming. Right. No, I mean, look, the fact is, by the time the Marvel stuff comes along, I get turned on to Marvel at around this time, okay? And, I mean, I knew Jack Kirby's work because I knew it from Boy Commandos, I knew it from Newsboy Legion, I knew it from the Challenges of the Unknown, and also from the Harvey stuff. And I was a huge fan of the Fly. There was the grotesqueness of the Fly really appealed to me. Oh yeah. And I got turned on to the Marvel stuff while I was at summer camp. I was at summer camp, and I came back from summer camp, and the world was Marvel awash. So I bought up all of the Marvels that had come out at that point. I think Fantastic Four #3 was just out. Right. And I became a complete Marvel junkie. I mean, I turned my back on DC Comics completely. And I've been a Silver Age guy. I was. Gil Kane was my guy. I mean, these guys were it. But in the Golden Age stuff, I mean, had I known the quality books, had I had the eyes to see what those quality books were doing, what Lou Fline was doing over there, what Kosky was up to, what Jack Cole was doing, all of which was under the aegis of Will Eisner, I would have been into those books as well. But I wasn't aware of it. And the Timely books in those days were really ugly. Marvel's books back in the Second World War were really dreadful looking stuff. Kirby's work at DC was vastly superior to the stuff he was doing with Simon and Marvel, I think. Yeah, I think so too. I like Maneely a lot. Well, I came to know Maneely's stuff much later, and a lot of that came out of Archie Goodwin showing me that stuff. I mean, Archie was, to a certain extent, the linchpin of two aspects of my life. He showed me a lot of the 40s and 50s stuff that I'd never seen, and he also was the one who weaned me away from science fiction into crime fiction. It's funny, in all the interviews we do, two common threads come up. One is everybody says that they are super early readers, and I wondered about that with you. Yes, I entered kindergarten reading on the 4th grade level because of comics. Yeah, that's what we hear each time. And most of the people we talk to talk about Archie Goodwin as somebody that was very important to their process or their development industry-wise. I wouldn't say that he was important to in that sense. I wouldn't go that far because he didn't edit me much. We didn't work together all that often. But I respected his tastes enormously. He was also one of the funniest, wittiest men I've ever known in my life. And he was capable of being friends with people that seemed complicated. I mean, he was very close friends with Gil Kane, who was a very difficult guy, and was my first boss. And Gil suffered no fools. And the fact that Gil was close friends with both Roy Thomas and Archie Goodwin, and it went beyond, and it wasn't they weren't friendships of opportunity by any means. They were friendships of simpatico and like-minded ideas. That I have to say that Archie's tastes influenced me more than him as a professional working.
Around the age of 19 or so, how did you make your way to meeting Gil Kane and becoming his assistant? That was around 1969-ish.
Yeah, I met Gil when I was 13.
Okay.
He doesn't remember this at all, but I mean, he was like one of the critical moments of my childhood. At a used bookstore, where he was looking for Will James books. Will James was a Quebecois who reinvented himself as a cattle hand, who wrote a series of children's books about horses. Yeah. And Gil's drawing of horses has always been legendary and derived a lot from Will James's depiction of horses. I was awestruck by him. He was just an Olympian figure. Nice. And I found out, I don't know what it's like in fandom today. I really have no idea. The social networking has created an entirely different universe. But in those days, fandom, we were in touch with each other all the time. We had coffee together. We drank together. And I heard through the grapevine that a guy who'd been his assistant had died in his sleep. A guy who was going to be a player, a serious talent, a guy named Tim Battersby, who worked in a style similar to Woody's. He was one of the Woody guys. And he died at 21 of an undiagnosed heart ailment. And because of the callousness of youth, I called Gil, and I hear your guy died. You need somebody. I went to work for him, and I told him how my work was mediocre, and he disabused me of this notion. He said, basically, this work is utter shit. There's no value whatsoever. And my feeling was hurt. I had only one left. But ultimately, I learned I owe 95% of my career to the near year I spent working for Gil, more than any of the hands-on work I did for Woody or Gray or anyone else. Because I learned the rhythm. I learned how to do what I do from watching Gil do it. Yeah. So he was essentially, was he teaching you to like storytell, and you absorbed it all? Like what kind of process was that? It was more a matter of, I couldn't even put my finger on it. Just, there was something about the way he lived his life, the way he approached his profession, that struck me as logical and real. And I got it, Yeah. I mean, right now I'm working on the second arc of Hey Kids Comics. Yes. And which addresses a post-Silver Age area. It starts in 1950 and ends in 1980. And it talks about some of that relationship in an obscurest way, hopefully. Thank you very much. And I can't really put my finger on what it was, but to this day, I hear Gil's voice echoing in my head. Wow! When I find myself being pontifical. Did you work on Blackmark with him? I did. I filled in blacks. I erased pages. I filled in blacks, like I say, and I pasted up text. And I was terrible. I was skill-free. I had nothing going on. You can't know. And in retrospect, of course, now that I know more about Gil's life, I realize that he was exactly me when he was that age, because his work was terrible. He was awful until really I'd say a good 10, 12 years into his career. He didn't get any good. Right. His work in the 40s and early 50s is dreadful. Right. And then all of a sudden he develops, he begins to imitate Dan Barry and imitate Alex Toth after spending all those years imitating Jack Kirby. And finally, he finds his language. And I think a lot of that language he found was being beaten up by Bern Hogarth, who he was a far better artist than. But Hogarth beat him up so much, and Hogarth intimidated him so much. Hogarth intimidated him the way he first intimidated me. The difference is I got over being intimidated. I think Gil died intimidated. Oh, interesting. That's funny. Okay. So when you say intimidated, you're saying like at the Bern Hogarth school, that Bern Hogarth kind of got into his head to improve as an artist. That's what you're saying. Gil was an autodidact, and Gil always, I think, resented the fact that he never had an education that went beyond the 10th grade. And I said this in print more than in public, more than once. I owe my career. I stand on the shoulders of Gil Kane, Gray Morrow, Wallace Wood, and Neal Adams, and Joe Orlando. And the one thing that separates me from those men is that none of them could write worth a shit. You're a great writer. And I write well. Okay? Yeah, you do. Gil could write essay, but he could never translate that essay skill onto a comic book page. Yeah, interesting. The whole original art, question. So back in DC back then, they would take the original art. They wouldn't give it to the artist, but what was the story with Gil and original art? What exactly happened there? I don't know exactly, but I take very seriously the idea that he was a thief.
Okay.
I have no doubt in my mind that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a witness.
Right.
But I don't doubt it for a minute.
Yeah. Did you like him? Was he like a second father to you in a way?
He was the single most important male influence in my life. My father disappeared from my life when I was 9. My mother took me and my 2 brothers on the run because my father was a physical abuser, and so I was raised on welfare until I was a teenager and was thrown out of the house when I was 16 because I was a complete asshole.
Was that your biological father that did that, or was it the stepfather?
No, I never knew my biological father.
Okay, so this is your stepdad.
So yes, I am a bastard, literally and figuratively. Thank you very much.
Jim has some questions about some later Gil Kane work. Jim, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask you, in terms of Legend of the Dark Knight, 24 to 26 of Flyer, where you wrote it and Gil Kane illustrated it, what was that like to work with your mentor, where you're the writer and he's putting on paper what's in your mind?
Well, Gil was the one who came to me with the generalized concept. Okay, Gil was a guy who had a nose like a toucan, and as soon as he had it bobbed off and turned into a Charles Saxon New Yorker cartoon, he saw anti-Semites under every rock.
Huh.
And ironically, of course, he drank cocktails with those people on Friday night every Friday night.
Yeah, so he had a nose job. That explains the pictures being so different from when he was younger.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I addressed this issue in the second arc of Hey Kids, by the way. That's
funny
because I'm willing to go out on a limb.
I like it,
but. The real irony is that he approached me on this one, and around the same time he approached me with a second project, which is to do an adaptation of Gladiator. He was originally going to be the artist of that book. Okay.
The one that Russ Heath did.
Yeah, Russ Heath. Yeah, legend.
Yes. I wrote the script, and my working process, I don't draw anything or have anything drawn until the entire thing is written. I mean, I'm on issue 5 right now of the first draft of Hey Kids Volume 2. It'll be 6 issues. And I'm going to send my editor this incredibly rough draft as soon as I finish issue 6, which will be middle of the week. So he read the 4 issues of Gladiator. Why they called it Legend, I have no fucking idea. I couldn't tell you. And he decided he couldn't do it because it was too fucking difficult. That was the bottom line. It was too hard to do, which annoyed the hell out of me. It really did, because I wrote it at him. And it lay dormant for a little while. I mean, there were a number of people who were attached to it. And when Russ came up, I mean, at that point, Russ had been doing really nothing work for 10 years. And then I happened to be in D.C., and I saw the second half of that Enemy Ace 1940s thing that he did, that he finished up for that French guy.
Right.
And it just kicked ass. It was astonishing. And Russ and I used to live in the same neighborhood. I ran into Russ at a restaurant. I said, "You've been phoning it in for 10 years. What the fuck?" And he came on and did an astonishing job. But I still would have loved to have seen Gil do it. I really would.
Yeah, right.
Just one more question on that. I just wanted to talk about the actual flyer for a minute.
I have very little memory of actually doing it, Mayor. It's a long time ago.
The last page of issue 25,
all right, I'm going to have to take your word at this. You can tell me anything. Go ahead.
Okay, where you said you have the female character saying, I'm going to fulfill the destiny of bearing a child, your child, so like it or not, Liebchen, I'd suggest you lie back and enjoy it. And in the right-hand bottom corner is a box that says, next issue, the climax. And I just thought, for a DC comic of the time, that you're putting in that level of humor, sexual humor, do you remember at all if anybody was even aware of what you were doing?
No.
Slid it right under their nose.
No, never picked up on it at all.
Because I just laughed out loud when I saw that.
Look, if I'd written Think of England, would they have gotten that?
Of course, you worked with Gil Kane. Then you went over and worked with Wally Wood in his studio. So what was that? 1970, 71? When did that happen?
I guess it was around 70. Woody was living and working in Valley Stream, Long Island, and he needed someone to pencil a kind of a vaguely salacious Western strip. I was utterly unequipped to do this. I lasted for 7 weeks. I sucked. My work was terrible. Gray Morrow introduced us, and what mostly came out of that was my understanding of how dreadful I was, and a lifelong friendship that evolved with Jack Abel at that point.
Oh, nice.
Jack, because he was there, wasn't he? He was part of the group at that time.
Well, he was renting space alongside Sid Shores. Both of them had studio space there. And Woody planted me in the same room as them. And within a day or two, Jack spent his entire day fucking with Sid Schwartz, just making fun of him, just mocking him, and it went right over Sid's head. And he realized within a day or two that he had a henchman in me, and from that point on, I was Jack's bitch. We were horribly cruel to Sid, who never was aware of it at any time. He died having no clue of any of this.
Yeah.
That codified my place on the Jack Abel shit list. I was the first name on the list. It was a glorious list, I might add.
What prompted you to leave Gil Kane and then work with Wally Wood? Like
the work ended. The work with Gil ended.
Okay, so the project was over. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did you meet Wally?
I was introduced to him by Gray Morrow.
Okay.
Gray was one of the kindest men I've ever known. Just an absolute prince. Mm-hmm. You know, I got to know Gray. I think I met Gray briefly, and it may have been Alan Weiss who introduced us again. Or it might have been on one of the first Fridays at Jeff Jones's place. I don't recall. Gray was a real sport. He lived in Brooklyn. He had 2 apartments, one on top of the other. A different Brooklyn than there is today, I might add. He put me in touch with Woody, and that's how it happened.
That's how it happened. And so how is it working with Wally Wood?
A real learning experience, as I've said more than once, that I wanted my life to end up like Gil Kane's, but I had a terrified experience that it might end up like Wally Wood.
Right.
Woody was a miserably depressed, angry, by that point in his life, racist and anti-Semitic, drunken raver. Was just a terrifying presence.
But he knew you were Jewish, and you guys were friends, right?
Well, I wouldn't say we were friends. I mean, he was. I think he was far friendlier with guys who preceded me, with guys like Ralph and Larry, maybe Paul Kirshner, those guys.
I see.
I wasn't there very long. You know, Woody was just a really miserably bitter, unhappy man. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, have you read Hey Kids, the first volume?
Yes.
Okay. Thematically speaking, what that 5-issue arc is really about, underlying it all, is that every one of those guys of that generation believed that they were in comics as a stepping stone to something else.
Right.
That this is going to lead to some other aspect of their lives. I think Alex Toth, for example, always expected to become an illustrator of some serious import.
Right.
And they all were looking, and for them, I think a lot of it had to do with the newspaper strips. And of course, they came up against the glass ceiling of the fact that the newspaper comic strip world isn't really open to Jews. It's a waspish business. At least it was then. And the truth is, the difference between that generation and mine, and this comes out in the second arc, and it's stated explicitly, is that my generation does not come into this with any real bitterness, in a sense, because we came in knowing exactly what we were going to get and what we wanted. Yes. The difference between, Jack Kirby's, alleged, the comics will break your heart, kid, that kind of like Warner Brothers melodrama bullshit. These guys were really disappointed by the lives they ended up leading. Yeah. And they did get ripped off. They did get burnt.
And you feel like Wally didn't get what he was expecting.
But Woody was also he's incredibly self-destructive. He just, he drank at problems. Right.
Do you feel like his leaving Mad Magazine was the beginning of that?
Yes, I do, unequivocally.
Unequivocally, okay.
But his relationship with Gaines had deteriorated to so profound a degree that I don't think he could have stayed.
Right. Interesting. So Dan Adkins, did you...
Never met him, never knew him.
Never met him, never knew him. And then you started working on fanzines around this time in 1970. Is that correct?
I don't recall. Maybe.
Okay, maybe. All right.
I mean, look, we're talking, a number of years.
A long time ago. Yeah, it's a long time ago. This was before I was around. So, in the my first professional job under my own name was a one-pager for Murray Boltinoff that Neal Adams, basically, forced down his throat. It was terrible. I had no skill set. And I didn't learn how to work until, I was 5 years into the business. My work was terrible. Gil was right. The work had no value whatsoever. It was complete shit. It wasn't mediocre. It was dreadful. I am the least naturally skilled and talented member of my generation. I am nothing but a grind. I don't know about that. Yeah.
It's the truth. I learned everything I know is cerebrally based. I learned how to do everything I know how to do. I'd much rather, I look at a guy, and I don't think it's easy for these guys. Believe me, you can't know what it's like to have that limitation of skill set and walk into a room and have Bernie Wrightson waiting for you.
Wow.
The difference really is that I was smart enough to recognize my own limitations and do something about it. Right. And most of these guys, an enormous number of guys, believed that their skill set granted them a free ride. and that this is going to be it forever. You know, there was that endless summer sensibility. Those surfers who wake up at 55 years old and realize, oh my God, what did I fucking do with my life?
Yeah, interesting.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I live in a town filled with those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously.
So what was the Overseas Weekly?
The Overseas Weekly was a newspaper sold exclusively on PXs on military bases around the world. Woody had to deal with them to produce comic strips. He did Sally Forth and Cannon, which were, you know, they had nudity. They had no fucking, but they had a lot of nudity. And the same thing was true of the thing I did, Shattuck. I mean, I ended up dropping it. Dave Cochran came in and took it over and did a much better job. Cochran's skill set was in place by that time. My skill set didn't really emerge until the late 70s. And a lot of it came out of shame, because I was shamed by my public performance.
Did Wood pretty much ink over your guys?
He inked look, Woody, let me tell you about Woody. The way Sally Forth and Cannon were done was he had an assistant who would go through, he would hand the assistant, it was a double, I think, as I recall, it was a double tier, okay? Like the top half page of a full-size newspaper, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he would have an assistant, I won't name the name of that assistant, he's not dead yet, who would come in and go through the swipe file and trace other artists' work, photographs, everything, just to build to fill in the double tier with autograph tracings, okay?
Mm-hmm.
From everybody, from Kniff, from Toth, from Foster, from illustrators, from photographs. And then Woody would come in with a brush and ink it, and it would end up looking exactly like Wallace Wood.
Yeah, I got you.
I mean, years ago, one of my colleagues who had ended up penciling for Woody was going around using the pages that he penciled for Woody as samples, which is completely inappropriate because his pencils were invisible underneath Woody's inks.
Right.
Woody's inks would make he would make anybody look like Wood. His brushwork, his line was so indelibly his that it didn't resemble anything that had been done under the pencil. But before, yeah. It became Woody. And I can't think of anybody around today who fits that bill.
Who fits that bill, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody doing that. But then I don't pay much attention to the breakdown of penciling and inking these days. For me, I never learned how to ink, so I learned how to do drawings that could be reproduced in black and white. That's as far as I got.
Yeah, inking doesn't seem to have the same significance as it did when we were reading comics, at least. In that it's almost as if the colorist has supplanted him as the other additional partner.
I think that's probably true. That's the result of the digitizing of the universe.
Right.
So just super quick, I just wanted to obsess about horses for a minute. Did you draw?
Always a good idea to obsess about horses. How can I help you?
Did you draw horses for Shattuck at all, or did you avoid that?
They were terrible. I drew terrible horses. Just awful.
And you're not alone in comics. It's one of the hardest things, and I speak as sort of an authority on that. There's a lot of bad horses drawn.
You're obsessed with horses, aren't you? Yeah.
Yes, 1,000 horses.
I mean, Gil. The thing that Gil always said, and this is not a joke, is he said that one of the great separating elements of his generation and mine is that my generation never learned how to draw animals.
Oh,
his
interesting.
did.
Yeah.
I mean, he did Rex the Wonder Dog. You know, he did a bunch of horse comics. He did Hopalong Cassidy. All those guys learned how to draw animals. Okay.
I think Kane was one of the best.
What's that?
I think Kane was one of the best at the animals. His horses were fantastic. He would also, I mean, it was one of the things he would mock Carmine about all the time. Because he felt that Carmine's animal drawing was just dreadful. Well, they hated each other's guts. I mean, I got a lot of blowback from that relationship at DC Comics when Carmine was in charge.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, because I was associated with Gil, and rightfully so.
So I just wanted to make one observation, then give it back over to Alex to talk about Neal Adams. You've previously stated that superheroes were never your thing, really, that you like to do things about guys with guns or guys holding swords in their hands.
Well, the reality is, this is self-serving in the sense that when I started getting work, like I said, I wasn't very good. And I wasn't good enough to do that sort of stuff. I didn't have the skill set required for it. The only guy in my generation who came in when I did, a little bit before I did, was ready for that was Buckler. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, Rich Buckler arrived fully formed. He really did. He had his skill. He had a a perfectly matched skill set to do superhero comic books.
Right.
And there are so many complex reasons as to why he did not become a demigod that, that it's an entirely other conversation.
Right.
Starling comes in a couple of years later, but Buckler was there from the start, and he was the only one. I mean, you look at that. You look at Kaluta, Wrightson, Brunner, Weiss, Simonson, me. None of us were really superhero people.
Right.
And I was the least, and I was certainly the least skilled at that. So I had to literally find other stuff to do that I could match what little skill set I had too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems like your mentors, those first two, were perfect for you then, because Kane was interested in doing things like Savage and Black Mark, and Wally Wood in 1970 was doing sword and sorcery stuff,
right.
Barbarians, predating Conan.
Right.
So it's like you went to the right people to do superheroes.
For me these days, the stuff of Wood that I look at almost daily is the shock suspense stuff. The stuff that he did, for the liberal hysteria comics at EC. That stuff, I mean, his depiction of the crumbling American city, circa 1952-53, is the archetype of the visualizing in my head of what my childhood looked like. When I read Jim Thompson's novels, it's Wallace Wood's imagery that comes to mind.
Wow.
Well, thank you.
Different than Thompson, I think.
I knew. Yeah, trust me on this, pal. If you were that guy, you'd be drunk and dead.
Yes, I would be.
Now, around 1972, you left Wally and you met Neal Adams. Tell us what had you leave the Wood studio, and then how did you meet Neal Adams?
Well, I mean, I didn't have the skill set that could sustain. I didn't have to do a long work. I got bored really easily. I got frustrated because my talent wasn't there. Neal saw something in me which I've never been able to understand, that he changed my life. He really did. He pushed me around. He yelled at me. He manipulated me, but he forced me to get work, and he got me work, and for which I will forever be grateful.
Yes.
He's a very difficult and controversial figure. I'm using the word controversial in this context, but I know him personally, so I'm saying it.
Uh-huh.
He's a difficult guy, but I owe him that aspect of my career. I truly do.
How'd you guys meet?
I met him at DC Comics. And when he was working in the bullpen at DC opposite Murphy Anderson. In those days, a lot of guys work in the office. It's a conceit that I've fictionalized in the Hey Kids stuff, but most didn't, but some did. Mm-hmm. That's where I met Neal, and we started hanging out. I met him again at one of the first Fridays. Originally, the first Fridays were at Roy Thomas's, and they moved to Jeff Jones's place. That's where I met Bernie. It's where I met Michael and Alan and Frank and just all these guys.
Yeah.
Roy Krenkel, for Christ's sake. And Neal was there, and we started hanging out. I mean, we hung out as a group. In those days, the coffee room at DC Comics was the apex of DC on one arm and Independent News on the other. We hung around there. That's how you got work. If someone needed something fast over the weekend, you got a job.
Yeah. So then Neal introduced
you spend the day drinking coffee in there.
And Neal introduced you to Boltinoff and Julius Schwartz at DC Comics. Is that correct?
Julie wouldn't use me because for Julie, the archetypal artist for Julie Schwartz was Murphy Anderson. Mm-hmm. Julie represented a sensibility in the science fiction world of as literal-minded a take on SF as you could possibly imagine. If you look at science fiction illustration, there's a gap that exists that's leaped between the work of guys like Jack Gaughan and Ed Emshwiller, and all of a sudden you see guys like Boris Vallejo show up, and like even Bob Abbott's take on the John Carter of Mars covers and the Tarzan covers. And then Michael Whalen comes along, and Whalen's take on the Burroughs material, particularly the John Carter stuff, is phenomenally literal-minded. Okay, mm-hmm. And Julie Schwartz really represented that literal-minded nature. Okay, when Murphy died, his archetypal artist was Dave Cockrum.
Yeah.
In that sense of just there's nothing challenging or threatening about that work.
Yeah, it's kind of a smooth kind of line there.
Yeah, and I mean Julie could never embrace Joe Kubert's kind of approach.
Yeah.
Whereas he loved Mike Grell's stuff because Grell reminded him, from Julie's perspective, Grell was simply another version of Neal Adams.
Oh, okay, yes.
Okay. In the way that for Roy, when Roy couldn't convince Bernie to come over to Marvel, he got Brunner, and from Roy's perspective, Brunner was a perfectly good substitute for Wrightson.
Interesting.
Okay.
So you worked on some romance gothic stuff and preferred
terrible stuff. Oh God, it's execrable. I mean, if I had any shame left, I'd kill myself. The work is just dreadful. No, I mean, I had no. Look, I really had no. I mean, people laugh at me. They think I'm being falsely modest or overtly self-deprecatory. But the truth of the matter is, the work is dreadful.
Really?
And then I got good, but it took a long time to get good.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have anything natural going on for me.
Yeah.
I mean, look. Right now, I'm sitting in my guest bedroom. All right, I'm on the bed. To my right, there's a Bernie Fuchs painting from 1962. Directly in my eye line is the original poster for The Outsiders by David Grove. To my left is an Edwin Georgi painting, and to the right of that is a Nancy Stahl portrait of Johnny Hodges. I am surrounded by the work of giants, and the work is here to intimidate and remind me of being humble in my own insignificance.
Nice.
I'm quite serious.
Interesting. So those major DC stuff you did, like Sword and Sorcery 1 through 5, Weird World. Mm-hmm. You don't like looking at those.
I'm literally trying to learn something, and I'm getting there, but it's like I'm like a bottom feeding, knuckle dragging loser getting someplace. There's nothing happening that has any real value. Yeah. And I don't want to take away from people who love the work. You're entitled to love whatever you fucking love. I really mean that. But the truth of the matter is, from my perspective, I didn't get good until I was driven out of comics and was away for a couple of years, developing a respect for craft, and came back and did American Flagg. The work I did in the 70s, and I include in that the work I did for Byron Preiss, is numbing in its lack of understanding of the value of what I could bring to the table.
Oh, interesting.
By the time I got to do Flagg, I had actually discovered who I was and come to terms with who I was, and was able to put it on paper both in text and visual.
So
that's really what it's about.
So Killraven with Neal Adams, An Amazing Adventures.
The first major mistake of my career.
Why is that?
Because Neal took 8 months to do 12 pages, or 12 months to do 8 pages, and I did the rest in a weekend. And no good deed ever goes unpunished.
So was it Neal that introduced you to Marvel also?
No.
Okay, how'd that work?
Roy called me for some reason. I have no idea why.
Okay, because you guys were hanging out on the First Friday thing.
I met Roy at a couple of places. Roy was. Roy and I were. I mean, these guys were all 10 years my senior. I was born in 50. Roy was born, I think, in 40. Mm-hmm. There's that mini generation of guys born between 38 and 40. You got Steranko, Neal, Archie, Roy, Skates. Mm-hmm. They're all those guys born back then. And then they're a tiny generation. And then my guys come along. The oldest one is like born in 46.
Yeah.
I think Simon was born in 46.
Right.
And Rice is born in 48. I'm born in 50.
Yeah.
I'm the youngest guy in that group. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I had the biggest mouth. And nothing to back it up with.
So you were doing work for the Marvel Black and White magazines, right?
Yeah, I did some stuff there, yeah. I worked for everybody back then. I worked for DC. I worked for Marvel. I worked for Warren. Uh-huh. You worked because basically by that time the shibboleth of working for for two companies at the same time was gone. Mm-hmm. And all those Silver Age guys who sneaked over to work at Marvel, under pseudonyms like Gil did, and like Jack Abel did, and a bunch of these cats. Mm-hmm. That was gone by that point.
I see. Yeah.
You could work for both companies. You work where you could get work.
Uh-huh.
And that includes Atlas. Let's talk about that a little bit, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Atlas was fabulous. It was Martin Goodman wanting to get his son a job, and to piss in the face. I mean, recently somebody posted something on Facebook. Let's stop talking about the next Marvel. Whatever that may be. Uh-huh. And every comic book company wants to be the next Marvel Comics, but that's like lightning in a bottle. It doesn't happen.
Right.
He started this company, and he had a lot of money, and he spent a lot of money. And what Atlas really achieved, I can't speak for anybody else, but it certainly achieved for me, is it doubled my rate at both Marvel and DC.
Yeah, right.
To
compete, yeah.
They were right around the corner. Marvel was on Madison just between 58th and 59th. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, between 57th and 58th, and Atlas was on 57th Street.
Did you meet Jeff Rovin and Larry Lieber and Martin Goodman? Did you meet those guys?
I never met Goodman. I've never met Larry. I've certainly worked with Jeff. Jeff and I have had a checkered relationship for many, many years.
Oh, okay. Did you get your art back?
I did.
Oh, as part of that was part of the agreement?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By that time, we were getting artwork back, yes.
Oh, that's
some people say that was a fiction and it didn't happen, but
no, we were getting art back by that point. Yes.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's actually good to know.
Oh yeah.
What was your impression of Jeff Rovin when?
I won't say he's still litigious. I'm not going to say anything there.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay.
Well, let's not either, Alex.
Yeah, let's not either. My God. Okay, so now Jim, go ahead with Scorpion and all that.
One of the things that you did at Atlas was Scorpion, which had longer legs than one would expect, because you left it and they did something crazy with it, but you took it back sort of as Dominic Fortune, correct?
Yeah, I basically walked around the corner and I said, fuck those guys. How would you like to do the Scorpion over here with a different name? And they said, sure. That's how you can't understand how loose things were in those days.
Yeah,
that was the entire pitch. Even though I'd written the Scorpion stuff, they weren't going to let me write it at Marvel. You know, I mean, so much underpinning why I became a writer of my own stuff was that I realized that most of the people who were being accredited to write the material that I was drawing had failed as artists.
But now tell us about after you did it in the color comic, it went on and became part of the magazine line, and you were painting it, right?
I was doing it in full color in marker. It was kind of a mess. Again, I was applying limited versions of technique that I used in other places. You know, and again, it was a job of work. I didn't want to do their stuff. I wanted to do my stuff, and I was willing to strike the devil's bargain of selling myself out from under, but getting to do stuff I felt like doing. That was the bargain. You know, I hate reading that character written by other people, including by writers whom I rather like, because they don't have anything near the voice that I brought to the character. There was some bad use of that character at various points. But that's true with all, you know, if they last long enough, they become ruined at some point. Of course, that's the nature of the beast. Look, I still, as much as I have utter and complete disdain for mass-market superhero comic books, I remain utterly awestruck at anyone who can find anything interesting or new to say about characters that have been around for between 50 and 80 years. I'm stunned by this. You know, my entire relationship with this material is utterly based on nostalgia. You know, my favorite Superman product in the past 25 years is Tom DeHaven's novel. It's Superman. You know, I have no interest whatsoever in any of these things. But again, I'm awestruck. As much as I dislike him intensely, I thought Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman was just lovely. Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite Superman. It's beautiful. Works. It really is. It's aided along by the fact that he and Vince did an astonishing job just together. There's a great synergy between the two of them. But the work really is moving. It really is. It's astonishing. And again, this doesn't in any way interdict with the fact that I loathe him. So I'm going to be by the way, he loathes me. So there's a spoiler alert there. You know, he despises me as well. I'm going to be a coward and let Alex ask you about Star Wars because I don't want to do it. Sure, no, don't be a candy ass. Is it true that George Lucas personally requested you? Yes, it is. He'd seen the Starbucks stuff I did for Star Reach. Right. Okay. You know, Lucas was a half owner of a comic book store in New York City called Super Snipe. That's what he was doing for money between the time of American Graffiti and Star Wars. I see. He'd partnered up with a guy named Ed Summer, who had been one of the other graduates of that class at USC Film School. Lucas had seen this work. Certainly Han Solo was deeply inspired by Cody Starbuck. Anybody who knows comics knows that. But to say it publicly is to sound like a bitter old man, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Oops, I just said it in public. There you go. He did. I think he regretted it because I think people look at Star Wars in retrospect in the same way they look at Jesus. You know, when Jesus was around, if he was around for his 33 years lifespan, there wasn't much said. It was all basically what happened after the fact that mattered. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And Star Wars, look, I saw the movie 2 days before it opened nationwide, and I was stunned because had I known it was going to be this big a deal, I'd like to think I could have done a better job. I'm not sure I could have. The material didn't translate as well into comics as you think. And I did the breakdown of the script because one of the reasons that writers liked working with me in those days is that I could take that script and break it down into 6 issues. Okay. Right. And they would know full well they could work with it. Roy, when I look at those pages, Roy is just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. There's no faith in the reader to read narrative content into visual. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the case today, that sensibility has won. But the Star Wars stuff on the page and in the stills read like any number of, cheap jack super, science fiction movies you'd ever seen. There was nothing special in it. Anybody with any grounding in SF could see every single place that Lucas borrowed from.
Right.
Consistently. And that's okay. Again, it was a job of work. I'm 24 years old. I'm living in New York City. I got an apartment to support. I'm married, and I'm working. And you work.
Nice. So around 1978, this is around the time when Wrightson, Kaluta, Jones, and Smith had their studio. You had your own studio, Upstart Associates, with Starlin, Simonson, and Val Myerick. Tell me about that time period a little bit.
Well, we were all living and working in the city. We needed a place to work. We found a joint. I've never been to Wrightson, Jones's, Kaluta's, and Smith's studio. I never have been. Those guys always had a kind of a legendary quality about them that I had no part of. I didn't really have that kind of mindset at all. I was I'm a man among men and a worker among workers, and I felt that way about my life all this time. But we got a space. It was a large square room. We each took a corner, and the center was the common area, and it was a great working space. I was there every day. I lived closest. I was the only one who walked there. It was on 29th Street between 7th and 8th, and I lived on 25th Street and 2nd Avenue. And if you know New York City, the only way to get there was on foot or cab, because there was no public transportation would go around to get there. So I walked there every day, and I was on a kind of a mindset schedule that got me there at 7 in the morning. I'd show up with 2 bagels and 4 packs of cigarettes, and by the end of the day, the bagels were gone, and so were the cigarettes. I was a pretty heavy smoker at the time.
Was there a sense that you, Starlin, Simonson, and Val Myerick, that you guys were going to be the next generation of storytellers? Was there a sense of that?
No, not at all. We were there to work.
Right.
There were a lot of laughs. There's great anecdota of Simonson and a file cabinet, but that's another story. We had a great working space. It was really good to be there. I loved it. I loved being there. We had great parties there. We had a huge balcony out front that made for nice springtime parties.
Oh, nice.
It was good.
So before Jim starts off on the 80s, in 1979 you worked on World of Krypton, about Superman's origin. I love that story, but I do love that.
It's because you were a child and you loved it because it told you. Yeah, okay. I have no memory of.
I read it for the first time 2 years ago because I was 1 when it first came out.
One.
So, but
what 1 means to me is the song at the end of the chorus line. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The only thing I was staring at then was my 1 penis, and that's it. But and so it was a very busy time, and you also worked on Alfred Bester's Stars My Destination.
Yeah, the reason I did the World of Krypton was to support myself while I was doing the work for Byron.
Oh, okay.
Because Byron paid nothing. Byron paid absolutely nothing.
Okay.
And I had to support myself by doing hack work at other companies.
Sword of Heaven, Flowers from Hell with Michael Moorcock.
That was not with Byron. That was for Heavy Metal.
That was for Heavy Metal, and you did some design for Heavy Metal, the movie as well.
Well, it was my first real introduction to understanding of the difference between California and New York mindset. They'd spent 6 weeks and a lot of money trying to get designs for the last episode of the Heavy Metal movie, which, by the way, was a piece of shit. And they couldn't get anything out of these guys. And they hired me to come out. I was there for 10 days. They paid me a per diem. They put me up at a hotel. And I was able to deliver the work that they needed from me and finish that work by noon every day. They showed up every day at 4. And by that time, I was freelancing at the same time for A&M Records.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who worked in the art department at A&M, and I picked up some work from them that I was working on there during the week. So I made a great deal of money that week, relatively speaking.
Right. That was the Jesse James album cover.
Yes,
right?
And also some stuff for the Police.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
At any rate, it finally came clear to me that this is my version of the telegram that Herman Mankiewicz sent to Ben Hecht in 1927, which was, and this is a quote verbatim, "There's a fortune to be made out here, and the competition is idiots. Don't let this get around." And it's really terribly true, because the California-bred talent were utterly unmotivated to make any real action. If you move to California with a sensibility that comes from a work ethic from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, New Jersey, you're going to kick serious ass out here.
Right.
And that's been my experience. Okay. So basically, just working hard. I mean, besides doing the work that I was hired to do for them, I also ended up designing a female character for Juan Jimenez's piece, the Harry Canyon piece, because he couldn't see exactly what they were looking for. He kept coming back with a femme fatale, and I basically did, you know, a white girl version of someone singing Santa Baby. So yeah, that was my first introduction to animation and one of the very few experiences I've had working in it.
Interesting. You mentioned Byron Preiss.
I did.
During the Steranko interview, he had mentioned that Byron was on the search for the graphic novel, for the true sequential graphic novel. Tell us about your role meeting Byron Preiss. Do you feel like he succeeded in achieving the final graphic novel? Tell us about that.
I don't. I believe that Byron operated from a perspective of loving the idea of comics but having contempt for the language. And his work consisted of trying to find a way to reconstruct, deconstruct, and reinvent something that had already been done just fine.
That's an amazing legacy. Okay.
Well, he also had his head so firmly shoved up Steranko's ass that, you know, he could see through his nostrils.
Was Steranko an influence on you?
Not really. You know, I like Jim personally quite a bit. I mean, and the last time I hadn't seen Jim in many years, and the last time I saw Jim was in a convention in Ohio, and we ended up shooting the shit for a couple of hours, and he turned me on to something I had no idea existed, for which we ever grateful, which is totally outside of comics. It was the piano trios of Andre Previn. I mean, Jim has really good ears. He really does.
Yeah.
Politically speaking, Jim and I exist on different planets. You know, his politics and mine differ radically, if you will.
Yeah.
But no, not really. But again, I like the guy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, Jim, go ahead.
All right, so briefly back to Marvel, just for a minute, and your kind of departure there. Talk about For Your Eyes Only, the adaptation for a minute. That's where you had a falling out with Shooter, right? Yeah,
I did. Shooter and I, you know, for a while there, Shooter was talking me how what a wonderful guy I was. Shooter hated me, and I'm not all that fond of him either. You know, I represented the other side of comics to a guy like Shooter, or even John Byrne. You know, these are guys who did, you know, I mean, Shooter started working in comics when he was, 3, 6, something like that?
13, I think, but
yeah, whatever. And, you know, like the guys of the previous generation. And to a profound extent, he never really moved past that sensibility, you know. And I took on that assignment specifically so I could get the opportunity to do the cover.
Right.
And, you know, getting inked by Vinnie Coletta was not high on my list of desires out of my future. Okay.
Yeah.
And I wasn't good enough to survive underneath Vinnie's onslaught. Okay. And he and I had words about a decision he'd made in the office on Good Friday. It put an end to my presence at Marvel for a while. It drove me out of the business for a while. I ended up doing paperbacks for a couple of years. And happily so. And then what first made me the offer on Flagg, I jumped on it because there was an opportunity to come back to comics with which I didn't realize at the time, which would turn out to be a clean slate.
So we might owe Flagg to Shooter and For Your Eyes Only, because if it hadn't been for that, you might have stayed at Marvel for a while.
Oh, quite likely, yes.
Well, I'm looking at that work differently now.
Without question. I mean, you know, I was doing okay financially. You know, it was fine.
Alex and I both want to talk about Flagg because that's obviously a big departure. I mean, that is, as you said, a turning point in your career. Alex?
Yeah, so First Comics, tell us about that company.
What's there to tell? I mean,
they're independent comics. How did you end up there?
I'd been, you know, I was, like I said, by that time, I was in my early 30s. I was in crushing credit card debt, having worked for Byron Preiss for as long as I had, you know, because no one made any money working for Byron Preiss except for Byron Preiss. I knew Mike Gold from DC. We shared enthusiasms both in and outside of comics. And he asked me if I had any interest in working for a new company, and they had real money. Not to sound puerile or just, you know, or to blow the fantasies of American comic book readers, but this is a job, and I was in serious debt. And I had an opportunity to get out of that debt, and the money they offered to me was going to make that possible. Right. I created this book. It was a kitchen sink comic book. It was based on a lot of material I've been thinking about and reading about in that era. You know, I was a a serious stoner, a serious drunk. I was operating from a perspective of extremely blind rage at what I regarded with the depredations of the Republican Party. Who knew? I mean, really, who knew what was going to be coming down the pike, right? I mean, I was pissed at Reagan. Imagine now. At any rate, they bought it whole hog. That's how it played. And significantly, the book had enormous impact, but not on the audience, but on the talent pool.
Right.
Okay. Because the people who saw the book were people who became professionals. The audience, this is not a book. Even at that point, the audience had been convinced that the material was the brand, and I was operating on the perspective that we were entering a realm of star system, and that talent would be the brand. And to a great extent, it's sort of middle of the road for me, and I'm never going to achieve that kind of attention from the audience because I don't do material that flatters the audience. Okay, and Flagg was not an easy book to read for people who had been accustomed to the X-Men, and an audience that had been raised on the lap it to you of the Silver Age and then the Marvel Age. This was material that was too complicated for that audience. They just weren't interested in it. And also, comic book readers have a tendency to be very embarrassed by anything that goes beyond pin-up and cheesecake. When they introduce the concept of actual human desire, they get very, very, very itchy. They're not comfortable with this.
Do you think that you hit at the same time as Frank Miller was really becoming something noticeable, and that Alan Moore was doing what he was doing on Swamp Thing, and Dave Sim was really expanding his ambitions in terms of Cerebus, that all of you were doing, because you were part of that just as much as they were?
But I'm not familiar with Dave's stuff. I'm barely familiar. I mean, I knew Dave years ago, but I have no familiarity with the Cerebus stuff at all, I have to say. But I knew Frank's stuff, and Frank's first great gift, from my perspective, was synergizing Eisner, Ditko, and Kane, and beautifully so. Okay.
Oh, that's great, because you're totally right. I hadn't seen that, but yeah, Kane
that's
is
really
very
what
present
he was doing. And Alan's stuff. I read the Swamp Thing after the fact. The first stuff of Alan's that I read the Bo Jeffries saga, which just killed me. And I was reading the Watchmen stuff in black and white as it came in. But earlier on in that era, the Flagg stuff, after the fact, Jeanette Kahn literally grilled me for not bringing it to DC first. And I said to her, and I stand by this, that they would never have published the book as I'd done it, ever. Because the only reason Flagg existed the way it did was it was working. It was for a company without, to use your own word, baggage. There was no history there.
And it was made for the direct market, right? Not for newsstand.
Yes. There's no way that book could have done it. I mean, look, again, I reached a tenth of the audience that that Alan and Frank reached on their books. A tenth, because Flagg was a smaller company. First, rather, was a smaller company. And you have no idea how many years I've spent explaining to the visually and narratively and ahistorically literate crew that frequently interview, explaining that no, I did not get that particular trope or that particular technique from that guy. He got it from me, but you didn't notice that because you were busy reading Superman comics.
Right.
That's really the way it's at.
Was this where you developed some of your strongest collaborations too? I mean, in terms of your letterer, your colorist. I mean, there seemed to be, you developed a team that went on to do just magnificent work.
Look, I mean, I believe. I mean, we now live in a world which I don't think is ever going to change, where the writer is the alpha in comics, which is irrelevant and pointless. And the problem with that is that it reduces the letterer to a delivery system for text. When a letterer in comics is a narrative collaborator. And I'm lucky enough to have worked with Ken Brusnak from the time that we were in our early 30s. We've known each other since our early 20s. And Brusnak and I, as I've said more than once, twin sons of different mothers. We operate from an art director's understanding of graphics. And using the tropes of comics in ways that satisfy us. When I did the Divided States of Hysteria, when I gave Ken the script, I had no idea what to expect from him with my note that said internet chatter. There was a phrase that was bandying around. It seems to have vanished. But I expected something like along the lines of, caption buttons or some shit. What I got was this absolute tour de force of insanity graphics. That was fucking nuts, that I just loved. And it's true. The same is true in Flagg. I always got more from him than I asked for. And bear in mind, just like me, he's a phenomenal pain in the ass. We're both very difficult men, but we're also deeply professional and with a great love of our own professions.
Why did you pull away from Flagg, both in terms of writing and of art and then writing?
I was bored. I was running out of interest.
Well, that's a good answer. Now, were you making money on this?
Yes.
Comparatively?
Well, relatively speaking, I wasn't doing great, but I was doing okay.
And
first had great rates, and they were paying good rates, and I was generating a bit of secondary income.
I had mentioned Dave Sim. Dave Sim on in Comics Journal, once you left, was critical about that, in that he said that you left because you weren't self-publishing, and that only self-publishing at that time, those were the people that cared about what they created.
I didn't read that, but that sounds like bullshit to me.
That had nothing to do with it. You just were bored with the character.
Yeah, I was
time to move on.
I was tired of the material. I wanted to do something else. The fact that Jack Kirby could do 50 issues of the Fantastic Four while he was doing other shit, my God, beyond me.
Yeah, so it's a lot.
And did you have Times Square in mind at that point?
Yes.
But you went to D.C. first.
Well, yeah. No, but
okay.
I did the first Times Square before I did the Shadow.
Did you?
Yep.
Was it published before, or you did it before?
I don't recall. It's been a long enough time.
All right.
I don't remember.
We'll come back to Times Square, but Alex...
I could be wrong. My time frame could be fucked up. I could be wrong. But the Shadow was the first thing I did, my first California job.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I was offered it at the San Diego convention that July, and I was drawing it in September of that year.
Uh-huh.
I literally was drawing the cover, which became the poster, as my belongings were being delivered a week late. I mean, the first thing I did was I took my drawing table and assembled it and was working on that poster while the moving men were still moving my shit into my house.
So did that Jim Shooter incident kind of bar you from DC as well for a little while? And
no, not at all.
No, just for the Marvel. Okay.
Yeah.
And then
and again, I mean, frankly, if I'd come back to Marvel with my hat in my hand, I'm sure I could have gotten something.
Right, there you go. Tell us did you read Shadow pulps and things like that as far as research, or had you already done that?
I'd read a couple of them. I didn't really care about them.
Right.
I read the dossier to familiarize myself with the characters. You know, and of course I antagonized, the currently dead Harlan Ellison by what I did with the material. You know, and I think that a lot of old time Shadow fans are very unhappy with them, and fine. If you don't like it, do your own.
I like it. I read it. I liked it, but I wasn't attached to the older stuff.
Right. And I mean, the fact is, I think they hired me. I mean, Giordano buttonholed me on this at that San Diego show. I think they expected me to carry on with what Collusion and O'Neill had been doing, and I had no interest in doing that. I was more interested in playing with the idea of a 19th century, early 20th century man stuck in late 20th century America with all of those ethos. I mean, one of the things that Harlan was upset about, that I portrayed him as as a misogynist and a bit of a homophobe and a racist, which frankly seemed to be the default position of any white man in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Wait, who was that way? You're saying the Shadow was that way?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I see.
I mean, come on. I mean, we contemporary chauvinism will occasionally impose contemporary attitudes on old material, but it doesn't make it any realer. A white member of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant ruling class in the United States, in the time of Lamont Cranston, for example, would have been an anti-Semite, a racist, certainly a misogynist, and a homophobe, because those were all innate to white culture.
Right.
Sorry, it just is.
Well, as the series progressed, he got punished for it, not by you, but I remember he was, when Carl Baker was doing it, he got decapitated and was carried around in a box for the last half of the series.
That really delighted the rest of the Shadow fans out there.
Kind of took you off the hook almost.
Look, the fact is, I said at the time, I mean, the reason the Shadow was identified as a 1930s pulp hero was because it had been canceled in 1949. If Superman and Batman had vanished from the landscape in 1949, they too would be regarded as nostalgia items. That material exists because of nostalgia. I tend to stand back from nostalgia is good nostalgia. Do what you want to do with it,
Yes. Interesting. All right. And then
again, when I did the sequel to that, Midnight in Moscow, which is a prequel to it, that last page where Lamont Cranston deserts Margot Lane, the guy's a twat.
Huh. Whose idea was it to make the Shadow in the contemporary times? Was that yours? Or
mine.
That was your idea.
I said I said it would be a waste of time to do otherwise.
Right. That's cool.
The 2 volumes of Times Square, and
soon to be 3.
I was about to ask you before I even did anything else. It's been out there talked about for so long, for like a decade or more.
Well, the last 12 pages of black and white artwork have been delivered, and I've got the first 36 pages of it in color done. The lettering has been done on the first 24. Ken is working on pages 25 rather than 36 right now. We are trying to figure out a publishing strategy, as they say in the animated cartoons, as to how exactly we're going to bring it out when, and in what context and format. There are a number of balls in the air we're talking about right now. And I don't know what. It'll be from Image.
Okay. But you don't know yet if it's going to be in the size as the original 2?
It will probably not be, because those days are gone. The size of the book will not, but the thickness of the book will certainly be. There's lots of stuff here. We got lots of stuff.
And does it look like the other 2? I mean, you're
I don't know.
An older person.
I don't know. I think so. My editor seems happy.
So you're drawing it to look like those to some degree?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, you know how much people are excited about that. The people that are fans of it.
I don't think anybody gives a flying fuck, personally, but that's another story.
Okay, I do.
Well, thank you. You're alone, but enjoy the moment.
With that said, I want to say that when it first came out, when Epiphany came out,
you had no idea what I was talking about.
My first thought was, it's not American Flagg. Nobody's having sex. It's just a different book, and I didn't understand it.
Well, the idea of a comic book artist and writer not being a one-trick pony confuses the fuck out of the comic book audience, doesn't it?
Well, it confused me. I didn't know what to make of it.
I mean, look, the comic book business is filled with people who have one idea and keep doing it over and over again. And I'm not that guy. I like lots of different stuff, so I do lots of different stuff. I wish I had the sensibility to make a great deal of money doing one thing, and I can barely make enough money doing a bunch. So I'm doing what I'm doing. So Times Squared was an opportunity to do a Fantasia about my boyhood, which is what it is to a certain extent, an attack on my family, which is what it is to a certain extent, a sword and sorcery book for people who prefer crime fiction, and an odd tribute to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber.
I don't need to ask you a question about it. You just summed up. That was perfect. Now, that's volume 1, correct?
The third book completes a trilogy. The third book is called Hallowed Ground 0, and it's about the destruction of Times Squared. It completes the trilogy. Really,
but shouldn't we talk about jazz and music in relation to this, too?
Well, yeah, I mean, it reflected my then newfound and obsessive interest in jazz. I wanted to do a comic book that felt like a bebop solo, which was, of course, I operate from the perspective that my audience and I are on the same page, which is always wrong. I've always assumed that my interests echo my audience interests, which is I'm constantly being disabused of this, and I ignore it and go on anyway, because I'm kind of an idiot in that way. But I like doing different stuff, and if I'm really lucky, my audience occasionally catches up with me.
If you eventually release this as in one hardcover,
it will. That will eventually happen. Yes.
Will you include the American Flagg issue, the special?
In all likelihood, yeah. I mean, not the Cavill. Yes.
Anything else you want to say about the upcoming one?
No.
Okay, we just have to wait.
I mean, I'm pretty happy with it. I literally just finished the artwork and delivered the artwork to my next step, to my letterer and my colorist Friday. Right now, I'm not even thinking about it because I've moved on. I'm on script for Hey Kids Volume 2, which is called Prophets and Laws. Mm-hmm. Prophets mean the Old Testament prophets, not the other word. That's why I'm emotionally and mentally engaged right now.
Is this still the work you're most proud of?
What's that? The Times Square stuff?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. Although I'm pretty high on Hey Kids.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I'm looking forward to the next one. So, Blackhawk 3-issue miniseries for DC, prestige format. You had previously done covers for earlier Blackhawks. Your version was.
I love that book so much.
Yeah,
Blackhawk, as I've said more than once, was the first comic book I ever stole. I love everything about the Blackhawks. I still feel that the 3 greatest comic book cover arcs in the history of comics were Reed Crandall's Blackhawk and military covers, Harvey Kurtzman's covers for Two-Fisted and Frontline, and Dave Johnson's covers for anything.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'm crazy about those Dave Johnson covers.
Dave is the 3rd greatest comic book artist who ever worked.
Tim Sale says the same thing about his covers. He thinks they're the ones nobody can top.
And also, it should also point out that David's one of the funniest dinner companions I've ever had in my life. I've never had anybody drag me so close to the edge of gouting food from my nostrils as I'm so regular basis. He cracks me up. He's one of the funniest, wittiest men I've ever known.
Huh, cool.
And I'm a tough audience.
Now, there wasn't a lot of flying in that Blackhawk, and the continuity stuck for a good while past your issues. So clearly,
I love what Marty and Rick did. I really do.
Okay, so you do follow what happened.
When they completely shit the bed with that awful New 52 version.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
Oh God. Like G.I. Joe done badly. Oh my God! I called Dan and I said I'd love to do this again, and I think I've got a way to do it as a contemporary book. And he said we're waiting for the Sting to work over. Now, of course, it's not going to happen because Spielberg had made a noise about wanting to do it. It's never going to happen.
Okay.
Please, do you really think it's going to happen? Nah.
He's been talking about that for like 20 years.
Oh yeah, no, actually going on close over 30 because my first meeting with a Hollywood executive was in regard to that work that I did on Blackhawk back in '85.
Oh really?
Yes. So
I
think someone showed Spielberg a picture of the War Wheel and said, "Ooh," that kind of shit.
So Spielberg's a comic book guy like Lucas is.
No, he's not. He has no understanding of comics whatsoever.
Oh, okay. I see.
No, he's not. Unlike a lot of those guys of that generation, he's not a comic book guy at all.
Oh, Spielberg himself. Okay. Now,
I think he's a movie guy, not a comic book guy. In the way that Lucas was both a movie and comic book guy.
Yeah.
I get the impression that Spielberg has no familiarity with comics.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. Yeah, because you did work in Hollywood.
Anecdotally, back in the day when heavy metal was doing 1941, I am told by reliable sources that his understanding of the process was that he suggested to the editor of the book that she should memorize what she's looking at in terms of the sets and product and describe it to her artists. Mm-hmm. Whereas working with Lucas, I came home from the production unit with 400 stills, all of which looked like IKEA.
I have, Alex, one Blackhawk question before going. That first issue that you did, you have an opening.
I know.
That reminds me of the start of Rio Bravo, where there's no sound. You have no word balloons, and it's just like page after page. I always thought that was really exciting and unexpected. Any comments about that?
Well, I had read. At that point, I had read The Hunters, which is a novel about Korean War air combat, and also Keith Robertson's work about the RAF and the RCF. And I really wanted to. I was really enthused with the idea of the nightmare of air combat, and I really and that combined with the images came from Fred Cooper's stuff. You know Fred Cooper's work?
No.
Fred Cooper was the guy who created the Big Head cartoon that Lou Beach did for years. That ended up being used in Monopoly. And it pops
up, doesn't it? Monopoly pops up in this.
Yes.
Or in Times Square.
In Times Square, but because he's major domo. The Cooper stuff was also a great typographer and cartographer, and that's where the lion and the eagle come from. In this case, the hawk. And I really wanted to do a thing about because my dreams are almost always boil down to my shouting and not being able to scream and be heard. And I really wanted to achieve that effect. And I really wanted to do something that was different and interesting, and I thought the material deserved it.
Yeah.
And I do actually have a version of Blackhawk that takes place in the contemporary arena that I would love to do somewhere. And,
that would be great.
But it's not going to happen.
They're really giving you beautiful books, in terms of production values and everything. And then you have a falling out with DC over labeling, right?
Well, that was, yes. Well, there was collusion going on between Carmine and Stan about creating a rating system.
Oh.
And, collusion between the companies has always happened, just a matter of what they get away with and what they don't.
Oh, okay.
And again, this was at the height of my alcoholism and just complete oblivion. And I had that self-righteous blind rage that informed so much of that sort of experience, and hence Black Kiss.
And you and Alan Moore and Frank Miller and the sellers of the time tried to put your weight down and go against the labeling, but it wasn't effective, was it?
I don't think anybody really cared what we thought, because in the long run, fan favorites were not perceived as having anything really to do with sales at that point. There's less of the assumption was back in those days, and it's to a certain extent remains true, that sales are not dependent on the name talent attached. You have books that sell really well because a guy's doing it, but in the long run, I think the assumption is by the companies that they can survive any fan favorite as long as they've got the material behind the audience, or for the audience, rather.
Yeah. Right. That notion that sales went up on Spider-Man after Ditko left.
Right. Which and I by the way, they lost me.
Yes. I never went back as with the same kind of joy as I had over those first.
I'm a fan of Romita's work, and I really am, but in the same way that I stopped reading the FF when Jack left, I couldn't look at Spider-Man after Ditko left.
Yeah.
There was nothing there about it that interested me in the least.
Interesting. After leaving DC over censorship, you did Black Kiss for Vortex, and that was actually banned in some places, right?
Well, it was banned. Yeah, it was, because it was disgusting.
Canada.
It was also very funny.
Yeah.
But it was, going back to what I said, comic book fans tend to like cheesecake and titillation with an aversion to completion.
Right.
And I wanted to do a book that would literally, be appalling, and I succeeded, I think, to a certain extent.
Well, it was interesting. Vampires, transsexuals, I guess we would say transgender now, completely unexpected, and I'm referring to some panels, but it blew everyone away. When I read it, and I'm seeing Dagmar wiping stuff off her cheek, and I'm like, wow, what kind of comic am I reading? But
How dare I?
What was that?
How dare I?
Well, I liked it. I was like, I'm finishing this today because I want to know what happens next. Was that a profitable book for you?
Yes. On a per-page basis, the two most profitable products I've ever done commercially were Black Kiss, that original Black Kiss, and the Nick Fury Wolverine graphic novel that I did with Archie Goodwin back in the late 80s.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that one, yeah.
But because I took an enormous out-front page rate on Black Kiss, because I assumed it wouldn't sell. And it sold like crazy.
Yeah. The sequel, was it as profitable as the first one?
No.
No, okay. I love both.
It did okay, but not. It did not, because it was no longer the outrage that it had been.
Yeah, I see. So the character Dagmar, I remember watching like a Bob Hope show, and he's doing some comedy with a blonde lady named Dagmar. Is it named after her?
Yes. Yes.
That's hilarious.
Well, she was the cast member of what was the first late night talk show called Jerry Lester's Open House. Which I'm actually too young to remember, but I'm not steep in history of television. This precedes, Steve Allen and Jack Parr.
I see.
And she was just this enormously busty, crypto Swede. I think she was from Wisconsin, but pretended to be Swedish. I think Dagmar was her real name. But I loved the name so much that I stayed with it. I just thought it was fun.
Well, it really stands out. When I read that, I'd never heard that name. Then I saw the Bob Hope thing. But that character, how it was more of a character and that different people could fulfill that role, I just thought that was like just really smart, really interesting.
Well, thanks.
Howard, we're going to kind of power through the 90s a little bit so that we get everything in. You returned to DC for another kind of revisionist miniseries. That was Twilight.
With the fabulous Jose Garcia-López.
Yes.
Oh. If comics was a meritocracy, if only. Jose Garcia-López would be regarded as the one true king.
Wow.
He's so underappreciated. It's kind of amazing. It's fun listening to you talk about people like Buckler and him that are just undervalued.
Well, Buckler is undervalued because I think Buckler was a wise guy who took given the opportunity, would never allow his skill set to actually work for him. He was always looking for a quick buck way out. Whereas Garcia-López is a man of great honor.
Buckler's work on Jungle Action and Deathlock showed what he was capable of when he was trying. He was pretty innovative if he applied himself, which I guess is what you're saying to some degree.
Yes.
And then you brought back Iron Wolf and also returned to the Fritz Lieber characters, too, during this time.
Well, working with Mike on both of those was a treat. And the nice thing about doing the Lieber stuff was it was an opportunity to apologize for how shitty my stuff was on it. You know, it really was. It also reminded me of how much of an influence Lieber was on me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mignola, at this point, he hasn't become quite what he becomes later on in terms of appreciation, but his talent's there by then completely, isn't it?
Oh, I completely agree, yes.
And then you helped form is it Bravura?
Bravura.
Yeah, imprint from Malibu. Who were the ones that did? Starlin was doing that?
Walter Simonson, Starlin, Gil Kane, Steve Grant. It was a jolly group.
And
I thought we were so old and we were so young. It was unbelievable.
And talk about that for a minute. Like, what was the idea behind that?
It was an opportunity to take advantage of what we mistakenly identified as an opening in the market for a new line of comics. The line basically tanked. But we all had a great time. Power and Glory was a snide parody of what had been most of the comics in the 90s. What was coming out of the Image in those days, because Image is an entirely different company today than it was then. And, Image, the Image is like the difference is like between Hyundai in the 80s and the Hyundai today, that kind of thing. And now, of course, it's a great IP factory. In those days, it was just a collection of pastiches. And that was what Power and Glory was.
And with Power and Glory, you got a taste of something that would later on, of course, now be routine for you, which was getting criticized on the left for something that was simply storytelling. And what I'm talking about is the bad joke that one of the characters tells, because that fits with his characterization.
Right, exactly.
So talk about that for a minute.
Well, I had a character define his own character by telling an awful joke. And I was taken to task for telling the joke, as opposed to writing a character who would tell such a joke to reveal the depths of his character. And that is so utterly specious and fatuous as to embarrass me, to share a species.
And you were a pioneer there, because now that's become a daily existence for anybody that takes any chances at all. But this was early on.
The comic book audience, as I said, is the happiest place the comic book audience can find is in the world of a guy like Chris Claremont, who wraps everything up with a nice warm hot bath, a warm cup of cocoa, and a cookie. I'm not that guy, I don't feel comfortable with doing that, but that's what the audience wants. And if the audience wants it badly enough, they know where to find it. They're not going to find it with me. DC
also started a science fiction imprint at that point, Helix, and you were writing Cyberella for that.
With the astonishing Don Cameron, who learned a very valuable lesson from that book, which is that as much as he loved comics, he never wanted to be a comic book artist again.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Well, Don is a CG artist now of extraordinary talent.
Yeah.
And he had learned at that point that comics was just not the business that he should be in.
I see.
He's a phenomenal animator and designer.
Uh-huh.
And works very steadily and works well. I mean, he's the guy who did the covers of Hey Kids.
Yeah.
Which are not really photographs, but are photo manipulations.
Oh, I see.
They're completely created in camera.
Yeah, that's cool. I've friended him recently, and we've chatted a bit, and he told me he loved assisting you on those stories. And he said you guys had a lot of laughs on some of the pages. And
Oh, yeah.
What a fun time that sounds like.
Oh, Don is one of my favorite people in the world. We've traveled together. We still hang.
Yeah, that's cool.
What did DC do wrong on that imprint? Why did it fail? Because it had the talent.
I couldn't say. I don't think there's an audience for that sort of material anymore. I think I've said it more than once recently. I think it took me years to really fully understand it. But just as the Comics Code Authority infantilized comics, it also infantilized the audience. And it created an audience that was interested in material that was just challenging enough.
Yeah.
And
in fact, you've said it. Current comics are basically young adult fiction.
Yes, and young adult fiction using the model of the the Roadrunner Coyote as the paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because what you've got is corporately owned characters, and even non-corporately owned characters, involved in an endless chase without closure.
So let's talk for a few minutes about your time away from comics. It's around this time that you go TV Hollywood on us.
Well, the reason I moved to California in the first place was I realized, and I moved here the day before I turned 35, that I realized that I had no prospects whatsoever. That Flagg, as big a deal as it was for me, had left me as a cult figure. I was someone who cognoscenti knew, but was not known on a vaster, wider scale. And that I was going to potentially get as old as I am today, and I had to do something about that. And the truth is, I came out to California to attempt to use the cachet that Flagg gave me to get into the movie business, and ended up in television, for which I am forever grateful. Mm-hmm. If I had the CV that I had then, and I was 40 today, I'd have a 7-figure development deal with the studios. But back then, no one had any idea what to do with a comic book talent. Comic books back then were regarded as a genre as opposed to a medium. And now, of course, since the comic book business has become what it is in the mainstream world, that has become a truth, that comic books are a genre today. You know, we owe the existence of comics, mainstream comics, to Jack Kirby inventing Stan Lee, and Stan Lee, cheerleading the existence of comics for 50 years. But what those comics that ultimately got cheerleaded in were superhero comic books.
Right.
And when I started looking for work in television, I was perceived as a comic book guy dabbling in television. So I was giving comic book type stuff to work on. I never worked on a show that I'd watch. Mm-hmm. But I did the best work I could for the people for whom I was working. And I'm very grateful for the work I had, because it gave me a pension and it gave me health coverage. As banal and as boring as that may sound, at my age, it is a blessing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So you still get the health coverage from working there?
Oh, fuck yeah, man. Well, I mean, look, I've been on Medicare for 3 years, but I also have ancillary coverage from the Writers Guild of America, and I have a pension.
Oh, that's awesome. Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you, God, I don't believe in. There you go.
And did working on the television, is there any way in which that had a positive impact or a negative impact on your writing, on your art? Anything about when you came back to comics, was it different because of your 12 years in television? Oh,
absolutely. It had a very positive effect on it, in that it made me understand servicing the narrative in a more specific way. It made me understand the relationship of space to time. And I think it made me a better writer.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
Alex?
What did you do? You worked on the 1990 Flash TV show a little? Is that correct?
I did. That was my first show. They got me very cheap because my agent sold me down the river. I started as a story editor on that show. My last job, I was executive producer on Mutant X, one of the worst television shows ever made. Not the worst one I've ever worked on. The worst one I ever worked on was the worst television show ever made. It was called Earth Final Conflict. Okay. Which was a television series that should have been a novel about bad television. It was so dreadful. I mean, no, seriously, it was execrable, and I was only fired from it because I was a counter-fire. One set of producers demanded they fire one writer who to this day has never had anything produced, and I got fired and was immediately rolled over into a development position with the same company. But I worked on utter unwatchable shit.
That's amazing. But you got such good benefits out of this. Good
I did, and again, I'm grateful for those benefits. I'm quite serious.
Yeah. So then you came back to comics, first as a writer on American Century for Vertigo, and with Mighty Love, you were drawing again, right? Mighty
Love was the first thing I wrote and drew. I sold that a month after I got fired from my last television job. And again, I'd been away from comics for a long enough time that the book sank like a stone. I'm really proud of that work. I'm very happy with that work. I'd like to see it print again from Image sometime sooner than later.
I'm holding my copy in my hand right now.
Yeah,
I'm really proud of that work. You know?
Yeah, it's almost like When Harry Met Sally, but
it's arrived. What you mean is You've Got Mail, and You've Got Mail. It's based on the same thing, which is something called The Shop Around the Corner, which is a Hungarian comedy, which in turn was made into a film with Jimmy Stewart, and I forget who, Margaret Sullivan, and a musical called She Loves Me, which originally starred Danielle Massey. And oh my God, what's her name? The woman who played Miss Pipperidge in that production. Oh God, I hate when this shit happens. But most recently, there was a version of it with Laura Bernanti, who plays Supergirl's mom, I gather. who is now playing Eliza Doolittle on Broadway, opposite Zach Levi, who played the male lead. Who I'm on the basis of that production, I'm in love with this guy. I love him. I really do. Cool. So it's lineage. That's its provenance. And
I could see Mighty Love being like a Netflix series too, or something like that.
Well, it was written as a pilot.
As a pilot, there you go.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because when I read it, I felt like this feels TV to me.
For some reason, I obviously lost a bet in some karmic way that I have not been able to get any luck with any traction of getting my stuff turned into film.
Well, they should, because honestly,
your lips to God's ear. Back to that God I don't believe in. All
right, back to let's see if we can satellite this through the different gods back to the.
Let us pray again to that God I don't believe in. We keep constantly praying to this fucking God.
Or a seance. Let's do a seance. So was City of Tomorrow influenced by your work on Stars My Destination, or not at all?
No, not really. I mean, City of Tomorrow was for me a metaphor about gay marriage.
Okay, cool.
Read it again, you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, I've always liked the idea of the concept of a culture growing to sexualize its machinery. And the idea further, it's more influenced by Cordwainer Smith. In Smith's world, animals were elevated to the state of humanity but maintained as second-class citizens so that humanity could have something to look down upon. And I really wanted to play with that. And also the fact that we live in a world of sex dolls. Yeah. And I really wanted to play with that.
Sex dolls, do they provide that with your pension?
No, I'm married.
Well, that's good.
Good answer.
You can make whatever you want of that answer and do whatever you want with it, and it's on you to be ashamed of yourself right now. Trust me, it would. You want digression? You're asking for trouble. Please go on.
So, Legend with Russ Heath. Yep. It was a retelling of the Hugo Danner Gladiator story.
Again, as I said earlier, I have no idea why it was changed from Gladiator to Legend, but I thought Russ did an absolutely bang-up job. I love what he did. I thought it was great.
Yeah, were you guys friends?
Not really, but I've known Russ since I was a kid. And Steve Mitchell and I stood behind him as he inked the splash page, a double-page spread of Easy's First Tiger, with a brush on this rickety drawing table. Russ is a god. I was a huge fan. I always.
Oh boy, his work in the early '70s on DC's War books, every splash page, every double-page spread is just unbelievable. I can't think of anything that compares to it.
Look, he taught Kuber how to do lighting, and that's not a joke. It's true.
Wow. So in 2006, you did Hawkgirl, and that was written by Walter Simonson.
Right.
Was that a fun project because you guys had known each other for a long time?
We've known each other. Yeah, it was a gas to do. And it was. It's a character. I'm of the mind that nobody should draw Hawkman or Hawkgirl except Joe Kubert. Right. So I have a lot of apologies to make, but that's just the way it is. I had a good time doing it, but I was offered a seductive offer from Marvel, and I took it.
Because you did other superhero stuff. You did Punisher, Wolverine.
Aubrey Citizen brought me over to Marvel. I have no idea but Aubrey, as I sold Aubrey recently, he's a son I never knew I deserved. And he brought me over there, and I did Blade for 12 issues, working with the astonishing Mark Guggenheim is the most writer-friendly artist I've ever worked with. He understands how to call out shots. I worked with Matt. I did a bunch of stuff from Marvel at that point, and that dried up around I think it's early 2012, and I haven't worked for them since, except intermittently little bits and pieces. I think I aged out, and nobody told me.
Oh, okay.
I was told in January of 2012 that I'd have a job in April. And I looked at my watch. I'm not holding my breath.
When you say
I've aged out of both. I've aged out of both Marvel and DC.
You did something for DC recently, though, didn't you? I mean, the Newsboy Legion,
Rough and Ready stuff. But no one at DC or Marvel are calling me to offer me a run on a book.
The whole question of being aged out. So does that, in mechanism, mean that a new editor is now there? And now this new editor is kind of like maybe a little bit younger than the other one, so they kind of don't understand.
I don't think any editor. Look, I'm older than most of the editors of Marvel and DC's parents.
Right.
And nobody wants to yell at anybody who reminds them of their dad.
Yeah, there you go. I see what you're saying. So that's how.
I certainly wouldn't.
So new people
I'd rather work with someone who reflects my own contemporaneous sensibility.
Right. So
the reality is, I'm actually very well regarded by the profession in terms of delivering work on a professional basis.
Right.
But right now, the audience regards me as a truly horrible human being. So that tends to filter down to young editors who don't know me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there you go.
Again, I'm perfectly happy with the life I live today. I mean, I created my own reality, and I'm very successful at this. I mean, whatever bitterness I have, I'm responsible for.
The stuff you were doing for Marvel at that point was a lot of it was, not all of it, because you did the Phantom Eagle, but a lot of it was superhero stuff.
Mm-hmm. Like what? I did a 6-issue run on Wolverine with Guggenheim, which was a gas. I love doing that. I did 12 issues of Blade. I did like 16 or 17 issues of Punisher War Journal. And the Phantom Eagle stuff was a gas as well. And I did some Avenger stuff with Brian. I did some of my own. And it was all a great deal of fun. But it's not primary in my skill set. I mean, you know, in the middle of all this, I also did a Western for Disney Italia called American Century West.
Oh, yeah. Horses.
You know, which, you know, I'm very proud of and very few people have seen.
Right.
I have that. I like it a lot.
One quick question. This is actually kind of goes to Marvel again, but it's actually from the 80s. You mentioned it, the Wolverine Nick Fury. That was written by Archie Goodwin, I think.
Yeah. Wrote it. I penciled it in 1885 and inked it in 1989 because it took Archie 4 years to write it.
Okay, so tell us how it was work with Archie on that work.
It was a gas. I love doing that. I mean, it was doing it Marvel style, which was something that I'm not happy with. I'm not fond of that. I prefer working from full script. It's one of the reasons why I left Hawkgirl, because Walter works Marvel style. I didn't like doing that anymore. I just really wanted full script. But Archie, I mean, it was very simpatico. I had a great deal of room to play. I'm very proud of the work that I did. I mean, in retrospect, you know, you look back at work that you've done, and you can always tinker and play with it. It was just recently reprinted in one of these huge anthologies they're doing, and there's a lot of cringeworthy stuff in there. But you learn from your work. You know, you keep working.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean,
story.
look, I'm 48 years in, for Christ's sake. You know?
Wow. So, talking about the superheroes, back to that, including Wolverine. You described comics at some point as being about liberal ends achieved by fascist means, and I assume you're mainly talking about superheroes when you're talking about that. Look,
but no matter how you work on it, mainstream comic books these days are superhero comic books, with very few exceptions. And yes, I believe they are liberal ends achieved by fascist means.
So,
look at Batman. I mean, Batman is, as I've said more than once, is a rich guy who had a bad day when he was 8. Okay? And from that bad day, he has justified a vigilante's experience, the narcissism of which, if you actually stop for a moment to think about, is staggering.
Yeah.
You know, I was scheduled to do, and then had canceled out from under me, a panel at a convention in New York City a couple of years ago about the spiritual relationship between Bruce Wayne and Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And I stand on that relationship.
Yeah, tell us that.
Batman,
I'm curious, yeah.
Batman is about a guy who, you know, after that bad day, decided that he was judge, jury, and executioner. And instead of investing those billions of dollars in the Wayne Foundation in either politics or the private sector to fight poverty where it actually exists, he dresses up like a bondage freak and spends billions on these tools and toys to beat the living shit out of people he knows are bad by the way they look. Okay? It's a 15-year-old boy's idea of how the world works, embraced by 55-year-old men.
A ball gag would complete his outfit, basically.
I'm there, babe. You know, and you know there's a butt plug happening there somewhere. But we are dealing, as I say, we're dealing with a 15-year-old boy's idea of adult behavior embraced by 55-year-old men.
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about. And look, when I saw the trailer for Brightburn, that's what I suspect Superman would be like if he ever showed up from fucking Krypton.
Right. So in your stuff that you've done in recent times, you've met a lot of resistance, and people are very. But
resistance, yes, but not resistance from people who've actually read the material.
Right. No, and we're going to get to that.
The arrogance of presumption has interfered with my material. That's where it's at.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about in comparison to something else, which is you've gotten called ridiculously called fascist and everything else. You get called names and anti-Muslim and anti-this and anti-trans and different things, and it seems unfair. And you've commented about that mentality, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. But Frank Miller gets similarly characterized. Do you think it's the same thing, or is there room for legitimate criticism?
I think,
depending upon the material.
I'm not seeing what Frank got criticized for, so I can't speak to that. I have no idea. Okay. All right. I do know that in my case, as I said on a piece I posted on Medium a week ago, that I finally come to realize that the attacks on Divided States of Hysteria came from people who did not read the book, or, having read the first issue, presumed that, like all comic books, so, as it is in the first issue, it will be in the next 20. I write characters who change. Had they stuck around with the book, they would have realized that the character they had problems with was both the moral focus of the book, the heroine of the book, and ultimately the romantic interest of the lead. Okay, but they assumed that a man of my age, of my social circumstance, could not and would not do such a character. So I'm operating on being victimized by assumptions and presumptions, by fatuous assumptions and presumptions. Okay. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I've come to realize that the objection to that cover that we ultimately had to censor, because they didn't want the collateral damage of attacking my publisher that was attacking me, was based not on the act depicted, but by the victim of the act depicted. That the credulity of believing that I would encourage such an act, that the depiction of an act is akin to the encouragement of the act, or the act itself, is first of all specious and bullshit-based. Right. Secondly, as I said in this piece from Medium, that it was because of who the victim was. Had the lynching victim been a Jew, nobody would have given a flying fuck. I guarantee it. Right. It is that victim culture attitude operating in the comic book universe, combined with a level of performative morality, which ignores truth in the name of feelings. Yes. Feelings are not facts. Mm-hmm.
Were you surprised by some of your colleagues' reactions?
Surprised, disappointed, and they're all dead to me. And besides which, they're cowards, because not one of them has ever come up to say a word to me in person.
So you've not had an honest conversation with anybody about this?
Never.
Amongst the people you worked with?
Never.
Oh.
No, these people are chicken shits. Mm-hmm. And they are dead to me.
What about Image? How do you think they handled it?
I don't think they handled it as well as they might have. I think in retrospect, I should not have allowed that book to be censored. It was a mistake on my part. And further, and I will say furthermore, that I think they're gun shy about me as a talent right now, which is the disappointment I experience in not having Hey Kids Comics being selected as one of their 25 that they would consider the best of the year. Really insults me some, because I'm pretty proud of that book.
It is. It is a great book.
I will see things online where it says Chaykin apologizes, and I read Image's statement. Is there any place where you actually, I mean, you put it in some context, but I didn't hear where you apologized, nor should you have.
I did not apologize at all.
That's what I thought. I'm glad we're getting that out.
My contrition was for the shit thrown at them, not at me.
Tell me what megaphonics and identitarians are.
Megaphonics, I know, but identitarians, I can tell you. Identitarians but identitarians live on both sides. These are people who function from the perspective of filtering their entire lives through identity politics. On the right, you've got crypto-Nazis, or Nazis, let's call a spade a spade. On the left, you've got people who are gatekeepers of a level of performative morality, who encourage diversity, but their diversity is extremely specific. Right. And who encourage inclusion, but are very exclusive in their inclusivity. Yes. There are a series of proscriptions and prescriptions as to what is and isn't acceptable. I personally feel that contempt prior to investigation is the bane of the current culture. Right. You know, is this guy on the Nazi right accusing me of being a neutered butler of the social justice warrior left? Is this schmuck on the right correct in describing me as odious, a demon in a human skin suit? Who's got this? What kind of bullshit is this? Right. You know, nobody's actually reading my stuff. They're simply imposing their own moral judgment on imagery and drawing conclusions not based on facts but on feelings. That's right.
You know, Howard, I don't know if I told you, I'm actually, in my day job, I'm a divorce lawyer. So I hear things demon in a skin suit and a demon suit all the time.
Is that a current new one that people are throwing around a lot lately?
Well, I do get them first, I think.
How long have you been working as a divorce lawyer?
Since 1991.
Oh, Jesus. My God. The bile you must put up with on a daily basis.
Yes,
and bear in mind, I've been divorced 3 times, so believe me, I know the shitstorm you're living in.
I know we keep track of people like you.
Just in case.
I thought Demon in the Skin Suit was a circumcision reference. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, watch your step there, Buster.
So you said that you had come to understand how the Eloi could drive someone over to the side of the Morlocks. I just want to say that I hope that never happens.
I do too, but I mean, I remain an iconoclast and a great believer in finding a language of common ground. I will not make peace or common ground with a bunch of fucking Nazi cocksuckers. That ain't happening. But at the same time, I live in a state of moral shame over my side of the aisle and its inability to get past its own prejudices as well.
Right.
You know, I mean, one is cultural, and the other is blood. So I think we're in a lot more danger from the Nazis than we are from identitarians.
So 2 quick books I want to talk about. Midnight of the Soul. I like that a lot.
Nobody else did.
No one else. It's like it. I don't think anyone read it except me.
No.
I don't want to be unfair about it.
No, I know. I mean, it's the only thing I've done in Image that has never been gotten to the black. I have no idea. I'm very proud of the work that I've done in the past 25 years. I think it's a terrifically solid book, a tribute and pastiche to a kind of film that people love. And yet it found no traction.
Do the editorial people at Image come to or anywhere?
Image has no editorial oversight.
So none at all. So nobody says to you, can you maybe not put nigger and faggot both on the same page?
No. I hire my own editor.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, well, I earnestly believe that editors are an extremely valuable component of creating comics. Okay, I know that must sound like, oh, really? You mean that? Yes, I do.
And talk a little bit.
My editor is someone who I respect deeply, whose every idea costs me money and time. He more than justifies his existence.
Is that common practice at Image to do that?
I have no clue. I have no idea.
That's your thing.
And then let's talk about Satellite Sam just for a couple of minutes, because that seemed like a Howard Chaykin book that actually isn't written by Howard Chaykin.
Well, Matt has often described it as Howard Chaykin fan fiction, so I suppose so.
Was it fun to do?
Yes. Basically, it operates in a world in which I'm very familiar, and about material I'm really fascinated by. The societal suppression of sexual behavior in the 1950s is something that fascinates me and always has.
Right.
What people actually acted at and what they were letting the world to believe they were doing really appeals to me as a source material. So yes, and it was great to do a black and white book of that era as well.
Yeah, it was great. The art was. I thought it was a really strong art from you. I liked it an awful lot. I think Alex and I both were excited to hear you talk about Hey Kids. So
yeah,
Alex?
I loved Hey Kids. I guess the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And
there are only. Have you read the trade?
Yes.
All right. Cause the essay in the trade really lays it out. There are only 2 direct avatars, really. You know, obviously Sid and Bob are who they are. There's no question about it. There's no. I can't wink at that. But everybody else is an avatar. Everybody else is a blend and a mix.
Right, and that's the thing, right, is there are blends, but some of the blends, I felt like there was a similarity between Brian Callahan and Joe Manili. Like, I felt
yeah, absolutely.
Like there was maybe a 51% blend. Would you say that?
Yeah. You pull good numbers out of your ass. Okay, I'm only.
I do. I'm good like that.
Yeah, okay.
It's fun. You know, Laszlo Fabin. I could see that feeling like Alex Toth. Like, I felt some Alex Toth vibe there. And,
maybe,
right? Maybe.
I'm being flirtatious and coy now. It's really adorable. There's nothing ugly than a man of my age.
I like it. Your cheeks are turning red, and we're kind of.
Oh yeah, I feel like Bugs Bunny in one of those drag cartoons. You know? Yeah.
But honestly, I loved reading it. And again, you saw I made a post about The Dreamer. Jim recommended that to me the other day, and so I read it because it does kind of go through a biographical sense of some comic things, but
it is the most self-serving line of bullshit ever.
But it's a really self-serving line, yeah. And this, though, I love how you jump back and forth in time because it puts things almost, it's like a 4-dimensional story of these people that are largely based in true events, much more based in true events than other books that try to do the same thing. Tell us what started you off on this journey, and how did you get started on this?
Well, I really wanted to do the second volume of Divided States of Hysteria immediately because I was so fucking pissed. And I was dissuaded from this. And this was second in the line. This was up next. And I think what Image was expecting was something a bit more Mad Men in the comic book business in a kind of a linear fashion. I'm not sure anybody up there really saw where I was going with this. This was a result of, I've always regarded myself as the bridging link between the generation that preceded mine and mine. Mm-hmm. And I spent all those guys I worked for talked endlessly.
Right.
I paid attention, and I listened, and I wrote shit down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as I've said more than once, there are things in the book that are absolutely not true.
Right.
But that are anecdotal, that it needed to be included because they're part of the legend.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody ever hung anybody out a window. I think it's just not true.
Just
Too good a story not
right?
to tell.
Because that's a rumor, but it's a fun rumor.
It's just one of those apocrypha that you have to include just because it's so much a part of the language. Yeah. It really is. The second volume, which is 6 issues, which is really about how important that brief blip of EC Comics was to my generation, is much more linear in the sense that it's 6 issues. Each issue covers approximately 5 years from 1950 to 1980. And many of the characters in the first volume are in there. There are a lot of new characters, and it's much more linear in its direction, but it also lays out anecdote, apocrypha, and why EC was as important as it was, as invisible as it ultimately became, and how that importance was ultimately wrecked by a generational shift.
That's fascinating.
And the third volume, should there be one, will be about the impact of that generational shift.
I mean, obviously, we're all comic history fans or enthusiasts, like you phrase it, but I'm so excited about the next volume, and I highly encourage readers to check this out. It's funny, you know, just kind of reading through some of this stuff, 51%, Glacier and Gelbart. I mean, it feels like...
Well, yeah.
It feels like Siegel and Schuster, you know?
Yeah, okay.
I love the names. I love how these alternate names you come up with. I mean, for the superheroes, like Sea Sultan. Please do an issue of Sea Sultan for us, because I will read that. I mean, I love Submariner, but I love Sea Sultan. And our pal Percy. I mean, I don't know how you come up with this. You were so creative.
I have to thank my editor for that, because a lot of that was his throwing it around.
Oh, really?
That's cool. That was a lot of back and forth between the two of us, yes.
Yeah, and so much fun about how you had, I think, the Ray Clark character talk to the Tom Hollandbeck character, like, look, you're swiping from me, and you have no idea you're even doing it, and then the Hollandbeck is just like, well, I don't know what you mean, and so clueless, like some of that young generation could be so clueless sometimes. I think every little tidbit in here, everyone needs to read this, because it's just so apt, and the scene with Ted Whitman and the modern art where they swipe his panels from the comics.
Oh, you mean the Guggenheim?
Yeah, right. Such a Russ Heath kind of moment, and I just find that the moments in here, even if the moments don't exactly match the actual person it happened to, they're so true.
Look, as I've said, a lot of it is fiction, but it's all true.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it boils down to.
Hershenson and Berkowitz. I mean, I love these names. They're just so funny. Dan Fleischer. I love how you explain an artist responsible for the forum's language, a publisher who's just another asshole. I mean, you're so funny. I could read this multiple times and get a different laugh out of it each time.
Thanks. I'm very grateful. I mean, if the fact is, right now at my age, what I'm interested in is my legacy, right. And with any luck, the minute I stop breathing, this book will be discovered and say, "Oh, that's what he meant. Thank you."
Yeah, that's right.
Let's avoid pissing on his grave for another week.
No, I'm throwing flowers on yours, man.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say so.
Did Image really not include this as one?
Yes, they did not.
Well, that has to be a carryover from the other project.
I assumed as much. I assumed they were keeping their head down, gun shy of fear. You know, that's my guess.
Because comic fans should love this.
It does. It hurts. It really does. I mean, whatever feelings I have left, and I've only got one, but it's a really good one, is somewhat diminished. Yeah, I was disappointed.
Mm-hmm. So what?
You know, I was putting together extrapolating from a piece I posted on the Alex Toth website, fan Facebook page, that I was going to publish. Then I decided to hold off on it because the Eisner Awards were announced. Mm-hmm. And the only reason at this point, I've gotten so used to being decades of indifference that if anybody should actually come out with actual praise and an award, I'd be such untrusting and suspect. And the only possible outcome of positivity to come out of being nominated for an Eisner at this point is knowing that Will would be spinning on his rotisserie. Mm-hmm. You know, but I'm comfortable and yet bitter at the idea that I'm never going to be acknowledged in my own lifetime.
When was the last time you were nominated for an Eisner? And excluding
never.
Never?
And it's too late now, babe.
Your name was nominated.
I think I was nominated for the Hall of Fame about 6-7 years ago.
No, I'm talking about Neon Visions.
Oh, yeah, that's right, but I didn't write that. That was
you didn't write that.
That was Brandon Costello saying nice things about me.
That was going to be my last question to you. What was it like to have to read a book that went into that in depth about. Did you find yourself nodding your head or saying, "Oh no"?
It was cringeworthy. It embarrassed me terribly. I read it on an airplane. Okay, I'm serious. I'm flying home. I'd gotten a copy I was flying home from New York, and I'm reading on an airplane, and my seatmate looks over it, and and looks at it and says, "Why are you reading? You reading a book about?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, it's about me." And he looked at me like I was fucking nuts, and I was just like, "Oh God, why didn't I keep my fucking mouth shut and just conceal the book?" But yeah, I mean, I thought Brandon was right on the money. I have a feeling that Brandon got me at having lost a bet, and so he stuck with me. But he was very kind to me, and I thought his take on the material was flattering. But again, I don't flatter easily.
It's a sort of academic book on Howard's works, and it goes into great detail about individual chapters. There's a long chapter on Blackhawk.
Chip Delaney had lunch with Brandon this past week. He was in Baton Rouge, and Chip posted the covers of that one and Conversations. So I'm curious to see what Chip's going to take away from this. The nice thing about Facebook is you get reacquainted with old friends, and the sad thing about Facebook is you get occasionally acquainted with old friends. It's both.
Yes, that's actually right. So, besides the next volume of Hey Kids, and then what's not going to be called, you're changing the name to Oligarchy?
I'm thinking I'm going to call it Treason. Just get right to the point. Right to the point. And of course, Salad Ground Zero with Times Squared. But you could call it Odious. Yeah, but the audience has only that one guy knows what it means. You have to really. Right. I mean, I've gained nothing by overestimating my audience for 35 fucking years. Why continue that particular trend? No, what I've got next going on. Let's see. I've got the sequel. Divided States is written. Okay. Mm-hmm. Hey Kids Volume 2. I'm a third of the way into issue 5 in a very rough first draft. This version is going to go to my editor this week, so he can beat me up on it and help me out with what I really mean. Beyond that, I'm not really planning. I got nothing. Something will happen. Something will occur to me. Something will annoy me enough to try to do something else. So, but you think it'll be at Image? You're not going back to the unless Image dumps me. I guess so. I mean, nobody at DC wants me. There's nothing there for me. I mean, we are looking at an implosion. Sooner or later, the firing at DC of the various talents they let go really demonstrates the fact that I've been saying for some time that comic books no longer really are necessary to the mass market any more than Disney needs new Mickey Mouse or Warner Brothers needs new Bugs Bunny. The characters that exist now exist in the public consciousness in the cultural sense. The fact that $1.2 billion has been earned by this new movie really demonstrates this. They don't need comics anymore. Yeah, DC firing Churiello is just mind-boggling to me. And I think they fired him because they didn't really know what he did for a living. They really didn't know. I mean, look, every year I know is my last year in the business. And how long has that been true? Probably since mid-90s. Wow. Okay. So I'm okay. I'm pretty comfortable with my own insignificance. I'm comfortable with my own position in the universe, and I am the architect of my own adversity. I created every problem I have. I created. So go with God. Well, you are always welcome at Comic Book Historians because you post just such great long pieces, and we enjoy everything you ever post. That's very kind of you to say, and I'll continue to do so. And if I can annoy any more people, then you come up with some more. I'll piss them off, too. Please do it. I love it. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you, Howard. This has been an awesome podcast interview with His Eminence. A prince. That melancholy Dane. Here he is. The melancholy Dane, the prince of comics, Howard Chaykin. He says he stands on the shoulders of giants, but he is a giant himself as well. And will be remembered as such in the future. And hopefully not soon, though. Keep me alive, please. Come on. Don't bury me yet, motherfucker. And we're excited about your next project. I can't wait for Hey Kids Comics Part 2, 3, 4, and 5. Please keep up your great work. Jim and I loved having you on today. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm incredibly grateful, and I take nothing for granted. Thanks, guys. Stay warm and dry. Be well. Bye now. Bye-bye.